player personalities in the sense of like, oh, they've brought these particular lineups, but we can begin to understand what some of the things that they would go for are, right? For example, in terms of crafts that they might pick, they might lean on something like Oh, well, speak of the devil.
That's right.
Speak of the devil, literally.
All right, Envy. This rapid-paced drafting, keep us informed. What's going on here?
Well, I actually know that Clover's doing this on purpose. He's in my Discord server. He's actually drafting this way on purpose. I don't know how he gets away with this, actually. He knows what every card does in the format, right? He plays it quite a bit and practices. This one's interesting to pause on. I think he took right there, actually. But basically, I think we saw this in the World Grand Prix as well, like just rapid drafts. And really, when you know the format so well, you honestly don't have to look at your deck. I mean, you can just kind of remember what you've drafted the past, 4 or 5 picks and kind of go towards that. You know what your game plan is when you pick a faction as well, right? When you pick Bloodcraft, you know what cards are good, you know what you want to go for. So I think that's how they get away with it.
Why Bloodcraft insta-pick? You know what I mean? You see 3 classes. I don't even think he looked at the other classes. He just saw Bloodcraft and went for it. Why do you think Bloodcraft?
Well, two main reasons. I think Bloodcraft is really, really good at the moment in Take Two. Their bronzes and silvers are on average very powerful. And again, like, you practice the format a lot. You probably practice 2 or 3 factions at most a lot, because there are 8. You can practice seeing, quite a few. You're not going to ever pick Runecraft, right? So you practice 2 or 3, and then you insta pick one of those 2 or 3 every time you see them, basically.
So he's about to wrap up his picks here. All right, the last pick here. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Take-Two format, it's a choice of 2 different pairs, right? The left pair or the right pair, and you have to commit to one side or the other. And the big thing is that it's pseudo-random, right?
Yes.
The first pick has higher rarity cards, the middle pick has higher rarity cards, and the last pick has higher rarity cards, and so they kind of help balance out the strength and rarity of the cards that you get, to make sure that there's slightly more even of a kind of strength level in the decks.
That's right. So based on what you saw, Envy, do you think that DFCLOVER has the deck that he needs to as a Bloodcraft deck?
I think he was forced to take a few bad picks. If you noticed, the card quality he was given a few times was bad. But, I don't know. Again, he does practice this a lot, and I don't think he's lost yet. So, I mean, he hasn't even gotten close from what I can tell.
So on screen, we actually have the deck list that he picked in full here. The interesting thing to me is what do you concede in Take Two, right? Because you're not always going to get 2 cards that are the best options possible. Right. So sometimes you might pick up a card that you might not like, but that's for the sake of a card that you really did like. So just as a cursory glance at me, is there anything that sticks out to you here?
Right, so obviously Treasure Map should stick out to anybody as a card that, darn it, I had to take Treasure Map, right? But he's got great cards that fill that in, right? Pitfall is a great pick. It's a 3 play point spell that can destroy a follower that attacked last turn. I think a lot of players let that card go under their radar, and it's insanely powerful. We see Clover's pulling 2 of them. Goblin Princess, really powerful card. There really aren't that many useless cards in this draft, actually. Pazuzu's not that great, but it's actually a pretty solid draft, really, except the Chronos.
Yeah. Ending on Zeus and Sema also, really high value at the top end for Take Two. And I actually want to talk to you about Treasure Map, Envy, because I did a Portalcraft draft where I treasure mapped on turn 1 into a Grave Desecration. And
what does Grave Desecration do for players who might not know?
2 play point amulet that, at the end of the turn, Necromancy 4, put a 2/2 zombie into play.
It's like a very weak Kenny of dragons, but it should be Kenny of the zombies.
But Take Two. Envy, talk to us about why people even play Shadowcraft, and if Grave Desecration, even ranks up there as one of the reasons as to why.
It's definitely not, no. It can be a card you can pick, and it can be okay, right? But Shadowcraft is really obvious why you would pick it. You have constant board pressure in your bronzes and silvers, and if you manage to draft 1 or 2 catacombs, that's really good in Take Two, by the way. I don't know if you know that. But it's mostly just like, if you ever get a good chance of legendary, it's probably going to be strong, right? They have Eikthyr, they have Thane, they have even Corpse Lord of Woe can find use in Take Two. They don't have too many useless cards, and Shadowcraft just has really good bronze and silvers. So.
And that really makes up the core of your deck. So we'll see if this Bloodcraft deck on the side of DFCLOVER can make it. Thanks for the insight, MV, and we'll check back in at the end of it to see if there are any good thoughts about how the draft actually played out for the player. So MV, familiar with Clover?
Yes.
You know, and it's really interesting. One of the reasons why we have Envy on the show today is because she has a lot of experience in Take-Two and actually does play it a lot.
Yeah.
And one of the things here is, in the format of the tournament today, players who especially make it to this stage on the winner's end are so consistent. You know, they really have a lot of experience with how to get the most value out of the choices that they're given and how to play out that value appropriately, because the pace of the game is very different. The options you play against are very different.
Well, that's the whole story of Take-Two. I mean, it's especially when you get to a top 8 in a single or a double elimination bracket where you only play a single game. If you get to the top 8, especially if you win today, you have to be so consistent at Take-Two, picking the right classes, picking the right decks, like time after time after time against skilled opponents. I feel like this is a very skill-intensive format.
Well, we'll see. Oh, and just as we mentioned, right, Shadowcraft on the other end. So both these players got some very good options for themselves. It'll just come down to how they draft it. Mystic Ring is something that we talk about a lot in the context of, especially now with Daria being so big, right? A lot of players have opted not really to use it in Constructed, but we see it showing up in Take-Two. Do you think there are any particular benefits, or do you think it is one of those cards that they just had to concede and feel like, okay, well, I kind of more want the card that it's paired with, and it's not the worst?
So it's definitely one of those cards that you have to kind of pick sometimes, and honestly, Mystic Ring shows up a lot more than you would think in Take-Two. Now, the big thing about Mystic Ring specifically, as you saw DARX use it, is you can get rid of a high-cost card in your hand immediately so that you can smooth out your curve in the early game. And I feel like that's one of the most important aspects to Take-Two, is developing your curve appropriately. Because if you can set yourself up very well before the evolution turns, and you don't have to start spending evolution turns going into the mid-game, you'll have them left at the end of the game. And from my experience, the person with the last evolution point in Take-Two generally has the upper hand.
Well, we'll see playing out. He does have, well, it's interesting because Shadowcraft, we talked about kind of the necromancy and finding those synergies and being able to build up the necromancies to start using some of these effects that you draft. It seems like DARX didn't quite have a strong curve, and especially going second, that really might hurt him, I feel.
That's right. If you get into the mid-game where you're under pressure, specifically that you just can't deal with all of the followers that your opponent has, and you have to spend evolution orbs to catch up and not put yourself ahead, you're really behind in Take-Two, because it really comes down to, you know, a stalemate match is pretty much like, okay, everybody's answering back and forth, yada yada, but if your opponent gets to keep these followers in play turn after turn after turn, and you just still can't deal with them, how do you catch up?
Yeah. Plays a Demon Eater and has to throw away a follower in order to do that. And, you know, Demon Eaters are very high value and constructed because your deck is so efficient, right? All the things that you're drawing are going to be incredibly impactful. I think the fear in Take-Two is that that's not the case. Offers a tempo for DFCLOVER to play Arthurian Light.
That's right. Arthurian Light can be very good. I mean, it's definitely a source of card advantage. You don't get the most out of it, you know what I mean? Very small gains, but you still get something. And this is kind of the topic I was getting to, is DFCLOVER doesn't really have that many cards left in hand, but he still has 2 evolution orbs left. So I feel like he still has an advantage going into this mid-game. However, DARX didn't really take that much damage from the early pressure that DFCLOVER had. We only saw 1-5 get in there a few times. So DARX might actually have a small edge as well in the fact that all of the cards in his hand actually generate a lot of value, like this champion that he just played. Of course, whenever it gets attacked into, it gets +1/+1, so very hard to get over.
Yeah. I think the biggest fear for DARX right now, and we saw, just a pass turn on 7. And we saw what DFCLOVER drafted, right? He does have some powerful late game options in the form of Zeus that we see in hand and the Diablo Sema, right?
Yep.
And I think that might be a bit scary for DARX. So in my mind, it's kind of a race, right? What mid-range options does DARX have, and can he access them right now? Because there certainly is an opportunity with these double wards and the value he's getting from something like Lion Champion and Dark Blade Fiend. He could just run away with it.
Honestly speaking, let's talk about some of the value things in Take-Two. What makes your deck good in Take-Two, right? I feel like evolution orbs and priority of not using them and getting to the late game and still having them is very high up there. Number 2 is probably wards. Wards kind of go with point 1 a lot. They allow you to basically play a game where you don't have to evolve. You get to essentially force your opponent into trading with your wards and not using your evolution orbs. Plus, they just put your opponent in a really weird position. Do I want to throw away a lot of stuff just to get through it? Do I want to save for a few turns like you saw DFCLOVER do? It's really tough to play around them.
Ooh, plays the Banner Snatch, but opts not to go for the Enhance effect off of it. but that is going to regain board control for DFCLOVER. And removal spells, follows with Rush, anything that can act instantly out of hand is super high value in Take 2, just because your evolution orbs really dictate how much control you have over the game, much more so than in Unlimited.
Because honestly, it really just like, okay, I have this full board, it's great, I've got a bunch of followers in play, but my opponent still has an evolution orb left. We're getting back to parity again. I have my last big follower. If they still have that evolution orb, you know they have a chance to take care of it, and that's scary. And when you know your opponent doesn't have any evolution orbs left, you can play that big follower with kind of impunity, unless you know they have some kind of a, you know, Bane Rush type of effect, or like you were talking about. So.
So it looks like DARX is going to go for that and try to fill out the board and see what he can do. And this is basically playing right into DFCLOVER's hand. He has Explosion, which again, we talk about board wipes can be very, very painful in Take 2 because it might be hard to construct that scenario for yourself again. And I actually kind of like that the Arthurian Light does provide some kind of actionable turn every turn for DFCLOVER, which if this game peters out into a you know, low resource situation, I think that's gonna could make all the difference, right?
It's similar to the card I was talking about before the game started, Engraved Desecration. Like anything that can just produce value while it's sitting in play turn after turn after turn is just really hard to get over. I mean, it's essentially like drawing a card, but it's actionable. It puts the follower into play. You don't have to use any play points to do it, things like that. It just gives you small incremental advantages over time.
Wow, so he evolves a Banner Snatch and then uses the Explosion. Now, not only did this give the Banner Snatch an extra 2 points of damage so it could actually do something this turn, but it also survives the Explosion. And now DARX finds himself in this scenario where he has no Evolution Orb, so he has to play something that can affect out of hand.
That's right, and getting past this Zeus. Now, we do see Fall from Grace, but it's being used this turn.
Ooh, that's going to be painful.
That's going to be
painful.
Unfortunately, you know, even with 1 defense, that 6 attack was just too scary for DARX to want to take for another turn, and now he's going to suffer from the Zeus left over. And again, DFCLOVER with just 2 removal spells and an evolution orb left, he might just evolve and go face here and just try to end it in 2 turns.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. He's going to save it.
He's going to be able to just take some free face damage here, but every turn is just 1 step closer to the Zeus dropping and swinging lethal.
Yep, and I like this. This allows for more advantage to be gained off of that Arthurian Light as opposed to utilizing his Zeus when he knows he doesn't need to. I really like that play.
And remember, the Arthurian Light, if you know, off the treasure map, which we were talking about earlier on, you know, that's why Blightcraft has access to a.
So here's a real thing that happens in Take 2. Do you take the pile with the treasure map or do you take the pile with the Mystic Ring? I think always a treasure map, and I'll tell you why. 1, it gives you a 1-drop that you normally aren't going to take in Take 2. It's just not going to happen. 2, it can give you Arthurian Light, and it can give you Grave Desecration. 2 cards that just give you incremental advantage over time, and it can start as early as turn 2 or with Arthurian Light on turn 5, and you can see what it's been doing this game.
The Return of Tove, that's a card that we haven't seen in a long time as well. And that fall from Grace, we don't ever get to see this double-edged sword swing back at the player who plays it, but it's certainly just making things all the more complicated, I think, for DARX, because as his health pool has been going lower and lower, DFCLOVER has just been healing 1 every turn. You know, it's a difference of minus 2, right? Every turn. You lose 1, you gain 1.
That's right, and this, with the Zeus play, DFCLOVER saving it for the final push with that last evolution orb to be able to close this game out. That game looked, you know, just DFCLOVER just had it the whole time. He was down in cards, but he saved that evolution orb. He just had that Arthurian Light ticking every single turn, then had Zeus to finish. That was a tough game for DARX.
I think it's like Envy mentioned, right, where you pick cards that can give you a wide range of value on various different points in terms of a curve, right? So you can have early game presence, mid game presence, late game presence, which I feel like DFCLOVER had a very nicely kind of balanced, well-tuned Take 2 deck.
Absolutely.
So, well, DFCLOVER does take the win, and that'll be